All right, this is Eric Kirk. I'm with Chuck Rogers. This is Redwood Wonk. I think this is our third television time on television. On channel 12, I believe, is the Access channel. Thank you to Access Humboldt for letting us do this. We want to talk politics of what's happened over the past 2 weeks. Chuck, why don't you start?
Well, so I'm assuming we have like 5 hours to go over the last 2 weeks.
Right? I
know. A couple of things. One, still some concerns about the November election that we can talk about. Also, interesting that the governors of New York and California have unveiled some staged plans to reopen parts of their economy. Some optimism there. I think there's some caution we should talk about as well. Polling, new optimism, I guess. I'm still cautious about the blue tsunami that some people are still suggesting could happen in November. Also, the vice presidential sweepstakes continue. The numbers of coronavirus infections, a downward slope in some places, leveling off in others, going up in some of the rural states. So I think we could talk about all of those. You pick where you want to start.
Well, why don't we start with the polls? I actually have looked at the Real Clear Politics average, and you're right, Biden is ahead. Actually, PPP, I forget what that stands for, has him ahead by 1 point in Texas. Another one has him 5 points behind, But even that 5 points behind is really closer than it should be. We're a ways out. And we got to remember that these polls are not necessarily predictive. They're snapshots in time. Right now, Trump is a bit unpopular for a number of reasons with a lot of with people outside of his base, and we'll talk about some of those reasons. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of confidence in his national leadership. States are creating their own alliances, trying to coordinate. Because this isn't really something that should be left to all 50 states and every colony and territory, right? It's something that there should be a comprehensive policy, but there really isn't. And everybody's a lot of people are critical about how slow that the president was to get moving, and all they keep saying is, well, in January we did the Chinese exclusion thing, and that was okay, that was something. There's debates as to how effective that even was. It wasn't advised by people, so we have and then with his comments, and we'll talk about a few of them during his his daily sessions that he said he was going to cancel, but decided not to, probably because he can't help himself. It seems pretty clear that outside of his base, he's lost a lot of support. Now, if you look at the polls, his approval rating is in anywhere from 44 to 46, which is higher than it's been, but his disapproval rating is in the 50s, anywhere from 50 to 55. So really the major change is we don't have there aren't very many people who are undecided at this particular moment. People have decided whether they like him or not. Again, things can change. It is a long ways towards November, but I would rather be, if I was, working the campaigns and I was in Trump's campaign, I would be concerned. If I was in Biden's campaign, I would rather be in his position than Trump's right now, is how I would summarize the polls.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, if I were advising Uncle Joe, I would tell him to stay in his basement. And as long as he stays in his basement and the president continues to go out to the briefing room or wherever he may be close to a microphone, and he continues suggesting things like injecting bleach and contradicting things that he and his administration have advocated for, I think Joe Biden has a good chance. I think, not to be flippant about that, but I think we all know that the weakness of Joe Biden is his age and the fact that for his whole political career, he's been prone to gaffes. And I think the more he just does his scripted online little town hall type things from his basement, that can be more kept under wraps, and he can allow Trump to make the daily mistakes. So, and if I were the Biden campaign, as crazy as it sounds, in this age of traveling all over and being on television, that's what I would advise. I would advise him to just continue doing what he's doing, because it's likely that Trump's going to defeat himself. And I think there's plenty of evidence for that. By the way, on the polls, I did see one poll earlier this week that may be a little bit of an outlier, because the Real Clear Politics site is an aggregate, and that's the most useful. I did see one, though, that had his approval of the 30s again, and it's been a while before that's happened. But again, in aggregate, like you're talking about, it's still into the 40s. Yes, that's just his base, I believe, just the Fox News bubble. If you want to look at it, I think there are very few people who are undecided at this point. I think it is going to be a referendum on Trump in November, if in fact there's an election, and we can talk about all that. But I think it's difficult to be undecided with a guy who suggests injecting disinfectant. So, that's why I think he's going to defeat himself.
Now he's claiming that he didn't actually make the suggestion, that he just wanted the doctors to think about it and come up with that and who knows what it is. Somebody probably said something to him. I'm sure they didn't use the word disinfectant. Disinfectant has a very specific meaning, and it applies to inert surfaces, that you do. It is not applied to living tissue. There are different words for that. But somebody, I think, said something to him. There have been some speculations about it. There was a letter that was written to him by this religious leader who is famous for selling snake oil type of things, and he may have gotten that letter, and or there may have been some conversation he did have with one of his experts that he's misconstrued, and that's the problem. Is he goes off on tangents.
Well, that makes my point, Eric, that he's too dialed into that conspiracy theory network to be the chief executive of this country. That's kind of my whole point. In fact, it was so bad that Lysol had to release a statement telling people what we all learned in kindergarten, and that's don't drink the Lysol. So, he can say he was being sarcastic all he wants, but the tape is there.
No, and that actually, he threw a lot of people under the bus, because a lot of his supporters were coming out and explaining what it was and how this actually is sound science, but everybody is misunderstanding what he means by disinfectant, and coming up with defenses all morning after he said that. And then in the afternoon he comes out and says, I was being sarcastic. I wanted to see how the press would react. There's no indication of that. Everybody knows it's not true. But what he did was he basically completely undermine all the defenses that people were trying to come up with. I was on Facebook discussing it on a kind of a conservative site, and they were coming up with these things about the light going in and treating treatments of infections that way, and about how there are certain therapies that are like disinfectant, but now they all look silly, because they look like people who are just defending them no matter what. It probably look that way because that's what they are. And so his surrogates are now left, because he comes out and says, it was all a joke. It just anyway. And a lot of his Republicans were begging him, stop doing these hearings, or do them maybe once or twice a week. And he skipped a couple over the weekend, but then he just can't help himself. He's got to get his face back in there. He won't just let the doctors do the talking, the experts. He's got to interject himself. And, and he gets angry at the media, for asking pretty sometimes innocuous questions. And so I do believe that those briefings have hurt him in those polls.
Yeah, he's showing himself daily to be unfit for office. And I think that's the bottom line. And that's why I say, just tell Uncle Joe to stay right where he is. And the rest of us need to go about the business of making sure that the election in November does happen, that it is secure, that people can vote by mail if they want to, that who are still a little shy after this coronavirus event are able to vote by mail, absentee, without regard to the reason for that. And we also need to make sure that the Russians haven't already decided what the outcome is, and we're just going through the motions. So we need for all of that to happen. As long as Uncle Joe just stays right where he is, and the rest of us do what we're supposed to do, and Trump continues to do what he does, then I think Biden has a very good chance.
Now, there is something that's developing in the media, and we'll see how far it goes, but there is this whole Tara Reid controversy. Right. She claims that she was assaulted by him in the early 90s when she was working for him as a senator. And it looks like she has some corroboration of the fact that she told that story back in the 90s, including somebody who identifies as a Biden supporter. Could be a total hit. Could be a lot of different things, but the question is maybe is the Me Too movement being a little bit hypocritical and automatically rejecting her claims? And if there is any truth to her claim, there's still time. There's still time for the Democrats to choose another candidate if necessary. How do we get to the truth of this? It doesn't, and like it's not like other candidates. We won't name the presidential candidate where there's been multiple allegations. We've got the touchy, smelling the hair stuff, but we don't really have anything of this level. It's the only time he did. And that's not to say it didn't happen. Even one time is disqualifying. So how do we? How do the Democrats deal with this? You say he should stay in his basement, definitely, but how does he respond to this?
Well, he and his spokesperson have responded by saying it did not happen. Right. I don't know how much longer they can continue with that line. My view is that she should have her say. And in fact, apparently there are tapes from the Larry King show in 1993 when supposedly her mother called, did not identify herself, but her mother called in to report this and ask what to do about it. So, and then a friend of hers just recently, I believe it was earlier this week or over the weekend, corroborated the story and said that Tara talked to her contemporaneously and that she believes her. Now, as to how to deal with it, there are several ways to go about it. Joe could come out and say, I don't remember this happening, or he could say, yes, it happened, and I made a mistake, and this is not good. You and I would probably say that should disqualify anyone from running for the presidency. We do have a guy in office right now who has how many accusations?
I think 25 at last count.
25 or so. So maybe we could deal with that as well. You're right. It's not too late to select another candidate.
Yeah.
And, there are a lot of folks who around the country who are dealing with the situation we're in very well and look like good leaders for the future. Maybe the Democratic Party should turn on a dime right now and talk about opening up the convention in a virtual kind of way and making a different decision. I would have no problem with that. I don't want to vote for somebody who has that in his past. Yeah. I don't you would either. I thought that the Access Hollywood tape disqualified Donald Trump. I was wrong about that.
But we have to accept that there's a double standard. Republicans can get away with it because their base will not hold them accountable for that type of activity. The Democrats do. The pressure was put on Al Franken for much less. Serious allegations, but nothing on the scale of this or what Trump had. And so that's the difference between the movements and between the cultures. We hold our leaders accountable. And so the question is, how do we do that, though? It also could be a total hit job. We don't know. And so how do we sort that out? With Kavanaugh, the justice, we had the hearing in which they both came and testified under oath. She also had corroborating witnesses who said that she had talked about it one time. Back then, Republicans said those witnesses don't count. You need a witness to the actual action, which almost never happens, right? Yeah, and so it's there's double standards all over the place, but we do need to air this out. And yes, he did say it hasn't happened, but we do need to figure out how we're going to do this. There isn't going to be any Senate hearings. We can't evaluate her claim by watching her testimony. We can see her interviews and the rest, but how do we do this? But if we want to be true to what the Me Too represents, we have to take it seriously. It doesn't necessarily, there's always been a misunderstanding to people. Oh, it means you have to believe the alleged victim no matter what. A lot of us say we tend to believe them because that person's going to get death threats. I'm sure she's gotten them, so it's not like it's something that somebody's going to do lightly. It's not something you're going to lie about lightly unless you feel real strongly about something or you've got some agenda and or you're pathological, and I don't want to say either of these things are true, but how do we as a nation determine that? And if we don't determine it, it's something that will dog Biden throughout the fall, innocent or not. If there isn't some way that we definitively resolve it before then, and just even the doubts could be a factor.
Well, again, I have no problem with going through a whole process. And, in the times in which we find ourselves, of course, this would have to be online. That could all be set up. We could still have a hearing of some sort and get everything aired and figure out exactly what happened and what to do about it. I would have absolutely no problem with the Democrats using their convention to decide whether this is disqualifying. And if move back into the nominating process at the convention. I mean, that's what conventions used to be for. And somebody would certainly nominate Bernie. I would expect, given what we've been through over the last few months, somebody would nominate Cuomo, somebody would nominate Newsom, somebody might nominate Elizabeth Warren, Stacey Adams, and Kamala Harris, and, have the convention and see what happens. Because, again, I think this is going to be a referendum on Donald Trump. And
one last thing I would suggest there.
It could actually be a benefit to the Democrats. It could make the Democrats look less hypocritical than the right is right now. So I would have no problem with that. I would just want to know what the truth is so we know exactly who we're voting for.
Well, I also think that I'm hoping that something happens behind the scenes where leadership, including Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and others meet with him privately, either virtually or in person, and say, Joe, we need to know if this is in fact for real. We cannot afford to lose this election on something like this.
Right.
So if there is anything to what she is saying that is true, you need to drop out now. And somebody needs to have that talk with him.
Do you think
going on? What's that?
Do you think that might be going on and we just don't know it yet?
It may very well be. We have no idea, but I'm certainly hoping that they're taking it seriously enough and not in denial about it, that they are having that conversation, even if publicly they're defending them. They need to have that conversation, because that's really, I would say, if there's any way Biden could lose this other than the economy magically springing and everybody believing that this was all kind of overblown, like some people are saying, but that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. And no president has ever gotten reelected during a recession. So I really think that it's unlikely, and it's not like you can just flip a switch, as you say. It's not, and then all of a sudden everybody's back in their jobs and roaring again. So I really don't see any other way that he loses other than this particular issue. And Republicans have got a lot at stake. And that's why I want to say you got to exclude the possibility that it's a hit. But they really need to talk to him personally and say, are you sure this is not a problem, Joe? And
right.
Because you will go down in legacy of possibly letting this country completely fall apart for 4 years of this insanity if you are defeated on this basis.
Right. And if it is true and he is elected, then that there will be hearings starting after inauguration next January. So
right.
he'll be with this for his whole term in office.
Yeah, although, the upside is if he picks Warren and gets impeached, then she's becomes the
Yep.
president. So,
Yep.
it just, I mean, so that isn't the end of the world. Sure, they're going to do that. But anyway, that's the biggest concern, because everything else really right now is, unfortunately, it's because, of very weak leadership. I mean, this is ironic, is that guy got into office on his machismo, and what is being revealed is that he is a weak leader, not just incompetent, but weak. He cannot
Right.
stand up to certain people. He's right now, he's worried that his base isn't going to have enough meat, so he's ordering people back
Right.
into in to risk their lives, or the lives of their elderly in their family, so that we can continue to receive whatever meat products there are. And it just, I can see using the Defense Production Act for ventilators and masks and things like that, maybe other items as well, but meat, I just don't see that as quite the essential.
Well, and the union that represents those workers said, I believe it was earlier today or overnight last night, that some of those workers will just refuse to go back to work, as they should, because it's just unsafe.
Yeah.
So that could be a problem on the horizon for him going down this path. The other thing is the fact that he's wanting to open up some of these manufacturing jobs and heavy industry like that. I think is a problem that could unfold. And what I mean by that is that we need to remember that we're no longer a manufacturing and industrial based economy. We're now a consumer service based economy. And the problem is going to be, even as the country begins to reopen in maybe the third quarter, we'll see, there are going to be a lot of those consumers who will have a lot of debt that has been built up during the first and second quarter. And they're going to start getting bills in the third quarter that have current charges, and then also a line that says past due amount, because they've deferred a lot of their bills or didn't even pay some of their bills. And those obligations are not forgiven. They've
Right.
just been pushed down the road. And so the consumer economy that is the basis for us now is really not going to come back strong. Some economists are saying until well into next year. Some economists are even saying 2 years, because some of the debt and unemployment right now, and small companies small businesses that are not coming back at all.
Yes. A lot of restaurants won't come back.
Exactly. And luxury items are going to be put off for a long time because the money is just not going to be there for a while. So I think that Trump's optimism that everything is going to be nice and rosy right before the election is not well thought out at all. He's just not getting good advice on that.
But that's why he's pushing for the early,
Yeah.
stuff. As it turns out, a lot of these protests, the ones that are protesting, and a lot of them aren't wearing masks. The ones I have to say, in California, or at least Eureka, their protests, they all wore masks except for maybe one person. But this is actually turns out to be not quite as grassroots as it looked. It's a lot of the AstroTurf from the
Yep.
same people, the brothers up in Minnesota, I forget their names, put out a lot of stuff on social media, spent a lot of money on it, and this was coordinated, and obviously it's something that was supported by Trump, and is putting pressure, even though what they're pushing for is against his own guidelines. And so they're doing this, and it turns out that the leader of one of those in North Carolina, she's come down with the coronavirus. Well, duh, sorry, if you're stupid, you're stupid. I'm sorry, and that's probably going to happen to other people. Could happen to Alex Jones. Sean Hannity is cheering him from the safety of his living room, his set-up studio, but Alex Jones actually went out there. Makes me wonder if he really believes his own stuff.
I don't know. I think Alex Jones is just an actor, and with some other problems. But speaking of that, let's also not forget that just a couple of weeks ago, you and I talked about the situation in Wisconsin, where the state Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court uh, basically forced people out of their shelter at home guidance and into voting in public for their presidential primary. Since then, interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, which is the incubation period for this virus, as far as we know, at last time I checked, it was something like 50 to 60 of those folks who did go out to vote are now COVID-19 positive.
Right. Now, there's no guarantee that they were infected
right.
there. There's a lot of people being infected, but
does
also,
time frame, though.
but not everybody's going to be tested. We all know, and as the experts are telling us, that whatever positive tests there are is the tip of the iceberg, because they're still only testing people with symptoms in most states. And so, yeah, we have no idea how many people were infected on that. We'll know if Wisconsin's death rate goes up, whether or not it had a significant impact. But yeah, and we'll know about the effect of these demonstrations too, and particularly in Michigan, as to what happened. Not everybody in those crowds was that young, and I feel bad about it. But I think this is about the 7th or 8th time where you have people who thought it was all a hoax and who were, railing against it, coming up with the virus, and some of them have even died. I don't wish that on anybody, but it is. I hope their loved ones and the people around them learn something from that.
Yeah. Another concern I have, Eric, and this is both national, but it also is local. I'm a little concerned from an economic standpoint for areas that have colleges and universities as part of, if not a basis for their economy, because what we're reading nationwide, and it does apply to California and it does apply to Humboldt County, is that most colleges and universities are expecting at minimum a 20% decrease in enrollment on campus in the fall. Some are projecting 40 to 45% decreases on campus. Now, obviously, that affects the locality of that college or university, including here in this area. And I think we need to be on our toes about what's going to happen economically in places like that all over the country, including right here in Humboldt County, because I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. Now, we know some of the classes are going to happen online, and of course that will require tuition. But here's the other thing about that: if those students are not in town, they're not
buying food. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So something to definitely put on the radar, especially for areas like this.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing that I think that some people who are thinking that we're going to snap our fingers and then all of a sudden the economy is going to come rolling back. There are multiplier effects of that may help, but in the meantime, if you don't have those people, making those payments right now or buying those items, it's that you can have a reverse multiplier effect where it actually continues to slow down, even though you have more jobs because people are making products that cannot be sold. And it's not enough to just have the items. People have to have money to buy them. And the opportunity to buy them. And anyway, and the other thing that we're running into too is usually when an economy goes into a recession, it's because we've been in inflationary cycles where we've actually broke down the debt somewhat, and so we've got spending power to be able to do the Keynesian thing and to spend our way out of the recession. Obama wasn't allowed to do that because Republicans took over, and they absolutely did not want to have the Keynesian effect. Any spending had to be offset by other spending, which minimizes the multiplier effect. But we did, and so we never had the inflationary phase. We had very low inflation for the past 10 years. It was kind of slow. It's kind of come on over the past couple of years because we finally did the spending once Trump came in. All of a sudden we started spending, but now we've got deficits that are going to be astronomical. And I'm one of those people that says it really doesn't matter except if it's a real high ratio to credit, but it's going to be a real high ratio.
Right.
Yeah.
It will be after this, for
I
sure.
mean, but not credit, but it'll crowd out the credit, but domestic gross product. And it's, yeah, and we're going to have very low product for a while. And anyway, yeah, I don't see how. Now maybe will happen that way because everybody's got their jobs that are just waiting to go back if they manage to survive through these times. And people do have some money to spend, and with the $600, the extra unemployment for as long as that lasts, and the checks that we're some of us are still waiting on, and in fact, a lot of us. But it's only going to be for so much, and we have it looks like there's going to be some politics over the next stimulus bill, over the next relief bill, and one of the things that's going to be fought over is that the Republicans want to put in to insulate people from any liability. I guess I'm assuming workers' comp is what they're talking about for companies that force their employees to come back and then they get sick from it. It's. Are the Democrats going to go along with that? Or I hope not, but we'll see.
Well, and a lot of business owners are going to be a little shy about that too, just for liability reasons,
Right.
because that until that's tested in the courts, whose fault is that?
Right.
If the company is going to say we were ordered by state government and federal government to do this, but as far as we know, Trump is not going to take any responsibility for that. He's famously said he takes no responsibility for anything.
Yeah.
So I believe, if I were a business owner, I would certainly want legal advice on that. And guess what? A lawyer is going to tell you to be very careful about that until we know how the courts view it. So as you say, that's going to be something else that slows things and prevents that switch from being flipped on. And we really don't know how that's going to come down. And I'm really concerned about the unemployment rate and how long high unemployment is going to last. And of course, again, unprecedented times. So some of the guesses and statistics are wide ranging. Some people saying we may be at 15% unemployment for a couple of years. There are some who are predicting 25% unemployment for as much as 2 years. We just don't know. And some of that is going to be because until consumers are back on their feet, there's going to be no spending for small businesses to see that they can now start hiring people. And until they start hiring people, people aren't going to make money. So it's going to be a vicious cycle for a while. And we just don't know how this is going to play out. It's interesting. I was just going to point out, it used to be that the Republicans were very interested in things like debt and deficits. So, we'll see.
They will be again in January if Biden wins. Then they're going to be obsessive about it.
Of course. That happened when Obama won, remember?
Right.
All of us were back to talking about debt and deficit, yes. So,
but we will have a jobs and an unemployment report this Friday, I believe. It's the first Friday of the month. And so, we'll see it. The unemployment was only up to like 4.5% last time, but it hadn't really settled in. It's going to be interesting to see where that rate is. And of course, a lot of times that's not even accurate. Is everybody who is having a hard time finding work isn't necessarily factored into unemployment.
That's right. Some of those statistics lag behind as much as a month. Who knows? We really don't know. So I'm just going by what some of the economists are writing about these days, and what they're seeing overseas in some of the other economies that are a little bit ahead of us in this.
I mean, but if Biden or another Democrat wins, this once again is going to be a situation in where they have to clean up after the last person's mess, and with the other party essentially blaming them. I mean, Rush Limbaugh, 2 days after Obama was elected back in 2008, said we need to start calling this the Obama recession. He isn't even in office yet, and Limbaugh is pushing for that, right? It didn't fly. It didn't fly, but they're going to try it, and of course Trump's going to say, "Well, this wasn't my fault," and quite frankly, there's a certain element of truth to that because we were going to be hit hard. We probably might have avoided being hit as hard as we are, where we're like the epicenter of the infections and the deaths now. But he's right. It wasn't going to be fair. But economies, it's usually the president has not that much to do with whether an economy flourishes or not. It usually has to do with cycles and other factors. There's things they can do to make it better or worse. But the political reality is you take credit if it's you get to take credit if it's going well, and you get tagged with it if it's going wrong. I don't think it was all Bush's fault that the last one collapsed. I think it was years of both parties not dealing with what could be represented as positive assets, as people are selling their investments, packages. So it's just, I mean, there was a lot going on there that Bush wasn't the only one responsible for it, but he, could he have made it better, done anything better? Well, we don't know now. We do know what Obama did was he immediately started pushing for a stimulus plan, tried to get it internationally done, but he could only really do it until 2010 when the Democrats lost both houses of Congress, and after that it was like trying to get anything out of Congress was impossible. He had to rely on fiscal policies, on moving some spending around to where it had the most multiplier Keynesian effect. But it was really hard, and so they'll say it. Well, it was the most anemic in terms of recovery because of in terms of jobs coming back. It's because he's the first president that did not have the tool of Keynesianism afterwards. Reagan got us out of his double dip recession that he caused in 1981 when he actually was trying to do supply side economics. He never did it again. After that, he did Keynesian spending. A lot of spending on the military budget. That's when Cap Weinberger came up with the Soviet military superiority, which he's long since admitted was a lie, and managed to have such spending that by 1984, as Reagan's second term was starting, he had created a deficit that was larger than all the deficits combined going back to George Washington from prior. So the Republicans spend money. They understand Keynesianism, and they rack up debt more than the Democrats, because when the Democrats do it, the Republicans are adamantly, all of a sudden that's when they become fiscally conservative.
Yeah, well, and a couple of things on that. One, what Republicans do then is they'll drive up the debt, and then they'll say, "Oh, we can no longer afford Medicare and Social Security. We need to get rid of it." That's part of the plot there. Yeah. The second thing is, you're right in that no president can be completely blamed for economic problems all alone, because as economists continue to remind us, is that we need to all realize that we are in a global economy, and some of what happens is out of our control in that other countries do what they're going to do with regard to commodities and so on, and trade and spending and so on. So it is not all on the president of the United States. And the last thing on that is, no, Trump is not responsible for the fact that we are in a global pandemic. He can't control what happens with a virus. What he could control, though, is our response to it. And let's not forget that just recently it's come to light that our intelligence services had produced in his daily intelligence briefing many times, starting as early as late December and early January, the fact that this was happening and we needed a plan for it. It needed to be a federally coordinated response. And he only took the daily briefing a couple of times a week and didn't even read the things that they had prepared for him. So part of what he can be blamed for is just negligence and malfeasance and just not doing his job.
Well, he didn't want to spook the stock market in an election year. He's really
a leader is supposed to tell us.
I agree.
Here's what's going on, everybody. We need to be prepared for this.
Right.
Here's what we're doing to prepare for it from the Oval Office. I have appointed a czar to take this on. I'm going to be briefed on it daily. Here's how we're going to coordinate with the states. Here are the supplies we think we need. We don't have them all yet. I'm invoking the the Privatization Act, the Defense Act, and we're gonna get people producing these things. That could have been all happening January 2nd.
He could have had tests ready. He could have asked WHO for the tests to have it ready to go so that we could track it. I mean, there were a lot of things that could have been done. All he says is, well, I banned the Chinese from traveling here. It's not even true, by the way, but that's a whole other story. And where we got really hit was actually coming in from Europe. California has flattened the curve. We've done a really good job of it. And the rest, despite...
We were among the earliest. Newsom was among the earliest to do that. Look at the difference between California and New York.
Yeah.
And I think Andrew Cuomo has done a good job after the fact. But look, California went first, and we're much better off than any of the other states. And by the way, we are the largest. So you would expect most of the cases would have been in the state of California. Just statistically, that's not what happened because we got on top of it early.
But back to the president, I mean, we talk about weak leadership. I mean, he didn't want to spook the markets, but they're spooked now. I mean, it's just, and so it's, I mean, it'll go up and down because people are going to try to get deals. We know eventually it'll go up again. If it doesn't, we're going to collapse as a civilization. But it's, we do have this problem. And again, I think people, for the times when they were good, they'll put up with his antics. Some of them, people even say it's cute. Some Republicans will say, well, it's just his manner. He's a good leader. We don't like everything about his manner. Well, people, I think, are not finding it cute anymore. And,
I think you're right. And I think this is the glaring example of elections have consequences. We picked somebody with a track record in private business of 5 bankruptcies, losing money in a casino. And we picked somebody who has 0 experience in elected office, 0 experience in public administration of any kind. And what we need to start looking for in this country is the person who can be the chief executive of a public organization. That's what we need. Yeah. And Donald Trump is the last person who should have been selected for that kind of job description.
And who understands where the buck stops. Exactly. For him, it's always over there. Blame the media, blame China, blame WHO, blame, everybody, except he takes no responsibility for anything ever. He apologizes never. I mean, Obama took responsibility for that attack in New York. He had no way of stopping that, but he took responsibility for it, the near attack. I mean, he took responsibility. Even George Bush took responsibility for 9/11. It was all rhetoric, but he said it, and
look, part of that is showing some sort of empathy. Let's do just a quick comparison here. I believe it's the Washington Post who went through all of the public addresses Trump has given since this coronavirus thing started, and it was only a few times when he even mentioned the victims. Contrast that with Barack Obama. Remember what happened after the shooting in Charleston? He was down there. He went there. Yeah. And he's the one who delivered the eulogy. He sang with that community, and he did it over and over and over. Those are 2 totally different ways of expressing leadership and empathy and trying to bring a country together after a tragic, traumatic event, which is where we are now. And we're getting none of that today from the Oval Office like we did when Obama was in office.
And the last thing I want to comment on that is yesterday, Pence goes to the Mayo Clinic. Now, personally, I think the Mayo Clinic should not have let him in. If anybody gets, infected because of Pence, not likely, but if anybody does, that's medical malpractice. They should have said, sorry, no mask, no photo op.
Allowed to go in without a mask, that's for sure.
And but the whole thing is it's playing to his base, because there's a bunch of people who would say, first of all, you're caving to what those smarty pants doctors are saying, who want to force us to wear masks, and it makes them look vulnerable and weak, and and all of this. I guarantee we'll probably never see a shot of him or Trump wearing a mask. All of his entourage were wearing them, but he refused to wear it. And he said, I wanted to look him in the eyes. I don't know how he thought he was supposed to wear the mask, but it doesn't block your eyes, right? I mean, it's just and again, this is he doesn't represent a nation. He represents a particular tribal aspect of
Right.
politics, and I think even that will probably start to shrink at a certain point. He's got that intense right up to 45%, but there's only going to be so much that they can do. Now, right now, they're blaming the Democrats for all the shelter-in-place orders, right? So that's their raw meat that they're being given to be able to do this, but it's not playing out well. I mean, they everybody thought that the Michigan governor Whitmer was going to be going down in the polls because that's what happened when the Tea Parties did their antics in 2010. It had an effect. It just bombed with
Yeah.
all the voters being polled so far, as the polls have been anywhere from 60 to 80% supporting shelter in place because they don't want the elderly people to die so that we can all have a good economy. I mean, that's just, that's
And let's not forget, one of the things that's been intriguing to me is that you're right. This affects the elderly and people who are immunocompromised more than anybody else. And of course, that's mostly the elderly. Let's also not forget that demographic tends to vote Republican more than Democrat.
yes.
So the fact that they're saying these things about sacrificing the elderly, like the lieutenant governor of Texas has been doing, I think is just a tactic that's confusing to me, because they're talking about their demographic.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah, they are, and again, but they're desperate to get the economy moving again. What they don't realize is they want to get everybody working again. I hope that everybody kind of sees that this is wealth is created because people work, right? I mean, we have this whole concept of it's the millionaires and the billionaires creating the wealth. They can't create wealth without workers, and this is showing that. I hope that leads to a little bit more class consciousness in American politics. We'll see.
Well, I hope so. And also, one other thing that you mentioned just a moment ago was that you're hoping that the size of the right-wing tribe begins to decrease in number. I hope for that as well, because I'm more and more convinced every day that the divide that we're in is not necessarily bridgeable. I'm not convinced that we're going to be able to repair this chasm that we look at politically and societally. So I'm hoping that there will be some over there who watch Donald Trump day after day after day and watch how Fox has to twist themselves into knots to try to make sense of it to their base. And some of them begin to say, you know what? No, I'm not going to become a Democrat, but I can't vote for these people any longer. I did it for a while. It just didn't work.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the Senate, about the possibility of Democrats retaking the Senate. Has anything changed in terms of, since then? I mean, I'm wondering, quite frankly, if Mitch is going to win re-election. Probably will, but it's going to be closer than he likes.
I think it is going to be close, and I think he has a history of close elections too. He's a 51-49 guy, usually, even in Kentucky. So he doesn't have a lot of wiggle room to start with. But one thing did happen, and I'm sure you saw this. The National Republican Senatorial Reelection Committee had sent out a memo instructing Republican candidates as to how to deal with some of Trump's gaffes.
And not to defend him.
Not to defend Trump, be kind of quiet about it, but don't go out in a blazing way to defend him. Trump heard that and wrote a subsequent letter to all of those candidates and said if they are criticizing Trump at all on anything, that he will retaliate against them.
Yeah.
So now what we have is all of these Republican senatorial candidates and statewide candidates, local candidates as well, not knowing exactly how to navigate this, because a lot of them are going to be, and with reason, afraid of the backlash from the White House. On the other hand, they're going to know that they need some independent voters, maybe even some moderate Republicans, to vote their way, especially in this election. So I think that is going to increase the chances for the blue tsunami. I'm still not convinced, but I'm a little more optimistic now than I was just 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I also think that I don't think the Democrats were hurt by the impeachment in terms of the national level, but I do think some House members might have been weakened by it. I think that's gone. I think that's
Yeah.
under the bridge. I don't think anybody's going to be thinking about how somebody voted on impeachment
Right.
at this point. I didn't see a whole lot of movement in the polls, anyways. Gallup had one that showed that his approval ratings went up, and the rest. But Gallup has been an outlier, kind of favoring Trump all year long. I don't know what their methodology is. I know they're not biased towards him, but the rest of them, even Rasmussen, which is a Republican one, didn't show any movement. And have him, I think the last one today, Rasmussen has, pardon me, Rasmussen has the disapproval rating at 6 over the approval rating.
Yeah.
That's high, and it's been pretty consistent that way. And that's and the others have it as -8 or -9. And as I said, you look at that we talked about earlier. There's no good news for him. I think that whatever impact that the impeachment might have had, pro or con, I just don't think it's going to be an issue. I think Democrats wanted to try to make it an issue in the Senate races, but I'm not even sure it's going to be an issue for them. I think it's just gone as an issue. It's ancient history. People aren't thinking about it.
Yeah, I think the COVID-19 event that we're still in is such a huge issue, such a huge event that has impacted virtually everyone, that impeachment is long forgotten. And I think November is going to be an election about Donald Trump, the person. I think this is not, I'll say it again. This is not going to be a policy election. I think this is going to be a choice. Do you want to continue with this guy in the Oval Office, or do you want somebody else? Is it time to make a change? So I see this election as more of a question about change rather than a question about any particular piece of policy.
Now, I am actually going to predict the possibility that Doug Jones actually survives this. There's a lot of stuff going on down there, and the Republican opposition down there. First of all, if it's what's his name, if it was out of the Trump, he's not going to have Trump supporter. That's going to suppress.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about who was the Secretary of State?
Sessions.
What's that?
Jeff Sessions, is that who
Yeah,
you're talking?
Sessions. Yeah, if he wins it,
Attorney
that's
General?
going to be a problem because Trump is not going to support him.
No,
And
he's already said he wouldn't. Yeah.
right, and the others are kind of really out there on this in terms of the CV. And Doug Jones is a leader who comes across. I'm just looking at intangibles. I haven't seen a lot of polls recently or anything like that, but I'm thinking I wrote him off about a month ago. I wouldn't write him off today.
Wow, if the Democrats could hold on to Alabama, that would be top line news for sure. Plus, let's give Doug Jones some credit too. I mean, he's a bright guy who is a former U.S. attorney and knows the state of Alabama, knows how to win statewide there. No, he's not as far left as I would like, but would I love for Alabama to send a Democrat back to the U.S. Senate? Absolutely, of course. So I'm with you there. Let's hope.
He voted for impeachment. He's not a coward. Yeah,
he did, and defended it in the newspapers and on television in Alabama, and did a good job of it.
All right, Chuck. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Matt, who's behind the scenes here and Access Humboldt for letting this happen, and we'll be heard on KZZH as well. Look for us in the schedules for that and Channel 12, the Access station, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.